Good morning from the campus of the United States Sports Academy in Daphne, Alabama. This is Sports Talk, and each week at this time we get together through the auspices of the United States Sports Academy to discuss pertinent issues and contemporary issues in the world of sport. This morning's issue is, can Brazil be ready either for the 2014 FIFA World Cup or the 2016 Olympiad? Our panel today is Dr. Fred Cromartie, who is our Director of Doctoral Studies, and Dr. Bill Steffen, our Chair of Sports Coaching. I've invited these two to discuss these issues because Dr. Cromartie has been to several Olympiads, and Dr. Steffen is a former head soccer coach at the University of Oregon, so he has quite a bit of experience. I'm Dr. Arthur Ogden. I serve as your moderator, and I want to thank those of you who've been sending in suggestions to Sports Talk on sportstalk@ussa.edu to consider what issues are coming up. So, gentlemen, we go right to it. But first, a little backdrop. On October 2nd, 2009, the IOC selected Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, as the host city for the 2016 Olympics. Brazil was also selected by the FIFA, the International Soccer Organization, to host the World Cup this summer. These two world sporting events are going to be held in 12 cities across Brazil. And if you know about the size of Brazil, you know that's really, really quite a massive undertaking. The New Zealand embassy in Rio de Janeiro and Brasilia, which is the actual capital of Brazil, passed a study to the business community in New Zealand in 2010, which outlined what they thought would be the economic impact and economic opportunities of both of these events, and invited the New Zealand business community to get involved. What they had estimated was it's going to cost $52 billion US for the Brazilian government to invest in infrastructure and other elements of preparation. That's $52 billion US. But the New Zealand business community could participate in what was going to be realized as a $100 billion revenue income from both the FIFA and the IOC. Problem is, that hasn't happened. And the Brazilian government has been beleaguered by strikes, bad weather, poor management, and so forth. And one of the things that was really distressing was in July 2013, a little bit more than a year ago, Travis Waldron wrote a column in thinkprogress.org, and he noted, and I quote here, "Instead, the World Cup and Olympics have become a symbol of everything that plagues Brazil, from rampant government corruption to astounding levels of income inequality. Construction costs balloon. Brazil's bid for the Cup proposed spending less than $1 billion on stadiums, but updated projections say the cost will exceed $3 billion in public funds. And many of the transportation and infrastructure projects that were supposed to benefit all Brazilians have been canceled or delayed. As their government hands over massive amounts of money for stadiums, Brazilians are wondering why their politicians were asking them to pay more to ride on the buses, why their overcrowded hospitals and crumbling schools aren't built to, quote, FIFA standards, quotes closed, in the first place, and why the prosperity they were promised seems like such a pipe dream now, quotes closed." Last year, or excuse me, just last month, John Coates, Vice President of the International Olympic Committee, has reported that he had visited Brazil 6 times and has seen alarming delays that are, in his words, quotes, "the worst I have ever experienced," quotes closed. There seems to be a total lack of coordination between local, state, or province and federal governments in Brazil. IOC funding is not being moved fast enough to the sites where building needs to take place. All of these added up to one of the most recent incidents where about 2 weeks ago, one of the workers, the 8th one to die on construction, died, and this causes work stoppages, and they just don't want to continue to work because they're grieving and they're worried about safety. FIFA officials are making the same observations, and there have been some threats by the Brazilian government to just stage a perfunctory scaled-down event for FIFA, much like what happened in Brazil in 1948. It seems that a country which has a looming problem with the poor, their infrastructure, their political structure, and the rapidly disintegrating support from the beleaguered citizens has bitten off more than it can chew. It doesn't look good at this point, either for FIFA, for Brazil, for the IOC, for the Summer Olympics. So now we look to some of the questions. I'm going to ask Dr. Cromartie this first question because he's been to a number of Olympiads. What causes nations to want to make bids to host the Olympic events? Obvious, aside from the notoriety that they'll receive internationally.
Well, it's not just the notoriety internationally. It's they get an opportunity to present their country to the world. And you have all the millions of different spectators that do like to attend Olympiads that would plan to come to that particular nation, so they partake in that. The other part of it is the economic aspect of it. You just sat here and you laid out some figures. 52 billion as opposed to 100 billion earned. That's what those nations are looking at. And the fact of the matter is that when we look at everything in totality and start to really do our investigative homework in that, we'll see that there have been very, very few nations that have made money off Olympiads, okay? Now, the most notable is Montreal Olympics in 1976. It took them 30-plus years to pay off the debt that was undertaken to host a 1976 Olympiad. Okay, when you have all of the delays, all of the setbacks, all of the different factions that are coming into play with hosting an Olympiad, then you run into the same thing. At first, everybody's all on it. It's a grand scale. It's a wonderful event. It brings in masses of the people in that, but yet all the little underlying things that play out as you're trying to get up to the opening ceremonies and that undermine everything else. So it's a group of people that sit down and say, it's wonderful, let's do it. They go about it, and then next thing you know, it could run the potential of failing.
Yeah, the devil is in the details.
Yes.
Which brings me to the next question, Dr. Stephan. Why has Brazil, in your estimation, seems to have so profoundly fumbled this great opportunity?
Well, I think you have to understand the place that soccer or football has in Brazil. They believe that they are the most extroverted proponents of the beautiful game. They play beautifully. It's tremendously important. It's a tremendous source of national pride. And there's unlike anything else here in the U.S. in terms of how they view football or soccer. And so the opportunity to host the World Cup is a tremendous opportunity. At the same time, if you have an opportunity but you're not prepared for it, then it can lead to issues and problems and so on. And again, as was mentioned earlier, the economic difficulties of some of the strata of Brazil was reflected in protests at the Confederations Cup, which was the predecessor to the World Cup, kind of like a practice World Cup on a much smaller scale, that I think was raised by groups of people in Brazil felt like, okay, this is an opportunity not only to present Brazil to the world in terms of football or soccer, but to now present to the federal government of Brazil, well, we have some issues, we have some problems, and so I think that it's being used to advance their causes for those political purposes, and Brazil is hoping to advance their cause as a footballing nation. And they've just run into difficulties in the actual execution of those.
Right. Remember, Brazil is a nation. You were talking about the beauty of the game. Pelé comes from Brazil, and he was.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is that part of the problem right now too, though, is that Pelé, the greatest player of soccer in the world, is the greatest ambassador for the game. So with them having the games there this time, the first time in 50 years. He is out speaking on behalf of the games there and being that continued great ambassador of the world, exposing folks to Brazil. And this is sort of a conundrum for people. It's kind of a catch-22 where they welcome it, They want him out there because he is recognized as the greatest player. You can also honestly say that Pele is the one who was instrumental in trying to and doing putting a spotlight on soccer here in the U.S.
Yes.
When it came to the New York Cosmos, and it's sort of grown from there. So, I mean, he is the greatest figure, and what better way than to try to take advantage of his notoriety throughout the world? Because I would have to say that he's second to none to Muhammad Ali.
Probably right.
He was just recently, he's currently a spokesman for Subway.
Yeah.
Every 4 years, Pele will garnish all these endorsement deals because people want to, reflect on World Cup past,
Yes.
his personality persona.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, there's a couple of questions here that I'm going to just toss up here. What do you think can be done at this point? Can the IOC or FIFA step in and do something? Should the participating countries in the FIFA World Cup or the summer 2016 Summer Olympiad, should they step up and contribute to the funding? How do you feel? What are some of the things that might save these two fantastic events for the rest of the world?
Well, I think that part of it could fall upon FIFA to assist countries if they are trying to host, because again, as was mentioned earlier, it's a very difficult proposition to get the infrastructure up and running, because it's as the events, both the World Cup and the Olympiad, have grown exponentially, so is the corruption, so is the problems. And so it's incumbent, I think, upon FIFA to say, well, if we want this to be such a grand event, we're going to have to contribute as well. Instead of just reaping all the benefits, it's time to assist in the execution.
Right. Do you think the IOC can help out, Fred?
Well, the IOC is prepared to help out, but it's just like both organizations. They could do it, but the fact of the matter is that the bid process has to, in terms of budgeting details, these nations have to spell out clearly what it is that has to be done, the contribution that has to be put forth to make these kinds of changes so that the event can transpire. Both the IOC and FIFA, they hold these nations responsible, okay? And that's part of the problem. They act as if they're professional sporting teams where they want all the amenities and all the luxury that goes with it, but we're not going to open up our checkbooks to make that possible. And that is something that is ingrained in their fabric, and it's going to be very, very difficult to break unless some of these nations step forward to say, hey, look, we want to host it, but what is your contribution going to be towards it?
Well, that's going to be a tough question. So I'm going to, this is simply a yes or no. When it comes to FIFA, is Brazil going to pull it off?
Yes. It's how successfully they pull it off. At this point, it's happening. It's happening.
Okay.
And so you would hope that through the love of the game and through the cooperation of the Brazilian people, that however it is accomplished, it will be accomplished.
And Fred, in the 2016 Olympiad, are we going to see the repeats that we saw at Sochi, where the accommodations were terrible and so forth? What do you think?
They're going to be successful in pulling it off, and I think that you are going to see some of the same things that happen. Here's the thing that you have to be cognizant of, and that we really hope does not happen, both for FIFA and for the Olympiad. Because we're pushing the limit right now in terms of structures being completed.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not have a major disaster. Because if we do there, that is just going to be a black eye on both of those organizations, when in fact they should have been in there, taking measures to safeguard everything, to make sure everything is up to par, standards and everything like that. So let's just hope there's nothing major.
Yeah, we were talking offline here too. One of the things we did not get an opportunity to cover is the security issues, because they can be massive in events like this. Fortunately, the Russians did a good job of taking care of security at Sochi. Let's hope that everything goes well, both at the FIFA World Cup and for the Olympiad.
From a security standpoint, though, it was highly publicized that the Russians were working with the international community at large in regards to security issues. We really haven't heard that just yet in regards to
Interpol
Brazil, and we just don't know. It could be transpiring, but we just don't know.
The other security issue that I think will be present at the World Cup that is not so much the Olympia is just the nature of soccer fans.
Yeah.
For better or worse, they can get a little carried away,
Yeah.
and that's a different kind of security calling versus any sort of agenda from any organization that has nefarious plans
Yes.
to exploit the Olympiad or the World Cup for political purposes.
Well, we do hope that it all comes off not only successfully but safely. We tremendously respect all the athletes that are involved. We know that it takes a great deal of planning. And I want to thank Dr. Cromartie and Dr. Steffen for contributing this morning. I want to thank you for looking in. Don't forget you can make a contributing idea at Sports Talk at USSA.edu. And this is Dr. Arthur Ogden, your moderator, signing off and saying have a great day in sport.